So we use this word happiness for two quite different experiences or realities. One is, as you said, hedonia, the satisfaction of our desires, or getting what we want, or being stroked by good fortune, which is great when it lasts. But the other, eudemonia is the Greek word for it. It's difficult to translate. Maybe that's why we haven't found it, because we can't find a good way of translating it. I suppose well-being is a rather weak contemporary phrase that we use, and which is the abiding happiness you're talking about beautifully, and that you describe as relational rather than just depending on individual satisfaction. Can you think of a word that would describe that other kind of happiness?
Yeah, I love eudaimonia, if there were a good way to translate it. But I think about it, when you think about the Greek philosophers who were really teaching and talking about it, they would speak about it as a higher purpose to life, which is what Bhutan is also saying on a collective level. What is the purpose of development? Not development for its own sake or GDP growth for its own sake, but what is it in service of? And this purpose element, in the context of eudaimonia or well-being, I think is really important, because it connects to the idea of a flourishing life or meaningful life, which leaves room for many, many different shapes and forms that can take. We all have different personalities and skills and affinities. But in the end, when we are that older person lying on our deathbed and looking back, what we'll be measuring or taking stock of or curious about was it a meaningful life? Was it a flourishing life? Did I live up to my highest potential? And I think if we reverse that time lens and we look at young people in this time who've seen their worlds disrupted, college graduation put off, job security, who knows what it's going to be, their underlying question shouldn't be what's the job or career I'm going to have, but what is my purpose? Where should I be? Where is life pulling me? What would be a flourishing life? And that's where it becomes very much about what you alluded to earlier, this question of what is my contribution? How can I serve? Which is very much a part of that definition of G&H I mentioned earlier. Serving others as a means of your own happiness. Of course, it helps other people, but who would have thought that that's connected to your own sense of well-being? Which, interestingly, a lot of the neuroscience research is showing around empathy and compassion and pro-social behavior, that it benefits the person who is serving rather than the other way around. And of course, it's so much a part of the teachings of Jesus Christ, of many of the spiritual beacons that we know of. And so I think it's a thread that you can follow through the wisdom traditions of humanity that has been asked by Greek philosophers and all the religions. And it comes down to this question of who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And the search for those answers leads one towards a fulfilling, a flourishing, a eudaimonic life.
Thank you. I think learning that, or relearning that, is necessarily part of a culture, isn't it? And there are cultures traditionally which have understood that wisdom, cultivated it, maybe never perfectly, and I don't suppose everybody in Bhutan is happy, are they?
Definitely not, and they would be the first to say so.
But would you say it's happier than other places on the whole?
I would say that the expectation is different. Even if you were to ask people about happiness in Bhutan, it would not be so outward focused. When I talk to folks in the West, it's often about outer things, accomplishments, jobs, society, status. Whereas if I speak to young people in Bhutan, it's often still and very touchingly about looking after parents, about contributing to community, about finding out what I'm good at. So it's not so much are they happier, but are they asking the questions about happiness differently?
In the right way.
Mm.
I met,
So I think just
sorry, go.
I was just going to say I think that there's an equal ability to be happy, of course, across all cultures because we are human beings. But definitely the society and the culture shapes how we move and seek that kind of happiness. And for myself, one of the reasons I was very interested in working and living in developing countries is that it offered an escape from that conditioning. And it takes place in very interesting ways. In South Africa, I stopped carrying a purse because in the rural areas where I was, there was nothing to buy. You know, I would go shopping once a month at the one shop where there's a certain amount of groceries, and I'd do that. And then there was nothing to buy. And that might sound terrible, but it was incredibly freeing. And when I came back from that environment and confronted a Walmart's with 20 varieties of shampoo, I was like a deer caught in the headlights. It was a terrible experience. It was too much selection. Whereas a lot of times the things I appreciated in South Africa were very simple. And my expectations went down and my appreciation went up, which is interesting that a lot of the research around well-being shows that those two things are connected as well. And we can often find ourselves on a hedonic treadmill where we're constantly running to satisfy increasing wants and needs because the marketing and the advertising world that we're living in is constantly telling us that what we have isn't enough. And our ability to catch up to that, we can't, and hence the treadmill metaphor.
There's a strange picture of modern global migration, and that is very often you meet people from developed, affluent societies who go into the developing world with a spirit of service, engagement, and find happiness in a way that they didn't find it at home in supermarket world. And on the other hand, there are large numbers of people in those developing worlds who are suffering, and because they don't have enough to eat, or they're displaced or persecuted, or victims of natural disasters or political persecution. And they can see their search for happiness is focused upon going to those developing, to the developed world. You know,
Yes.
to get over the Mediterranean or to get over the English Channel, and there they will find happiness. Well, maybe they're not. Maybe I don't know. Maybe they're not looking for happiness. They're looking for survival as a first.
Yeah.
Does that picture resonate with what you see?
Definitely. And I don't really see it as a contradiction either. You know, I think if I go back to Bhutan as an example, definitely they would not claim to be all happy or the happiest country in the world, but they would say that they are prioritizing happiness as the purpose of development. And what serves that are many of the things that a country that is developing in many ways needs to address. So the 9 domains include things like living standards. People need to have a basic income in order to be doing well. Education, kids need to be able to go to school, and parents need to be able to feel confident that their kids will be educated. Health, healthcare systems need to be strong. Those need to be addressed, and Bhutan has done a lot of work in the last 20 or so years to improve those and to raise living standards, to increase rural development, um, uh, basic health care and education are free in Bhutan, unlike many countries. So they've prioritized those things as being important, and they have more work to do in attaining better building blocks for development in that respect. So definitely, it's addressing those aspects as well as the things that maybe in more wealthy countries where we're starting to see those three aspects I mentioned, living standards, health, and education, are not equitably distributed in very wealthy countries or very wealthy countries. So as I mentioned earlier, when I was in the United States and I felt like the living conditions I was seeing in some of the inner cities could have been Africa, that is still the case. You still see statistics for HIV in America in poor communities and communities of color that look more like Africa because of the disparities that we're talking about. And then on the other hand, in very affluent countries, a lot of that economic growth has come at the cost of things like poor time use. You have a healthy bank balance, but you have no time to spend that money or to be with friends or family, right? So that's why I love this idea of looking at what are the elements of happiness and well-being. And those 9 domains could be different for different people and different in different societies, but they need to find that balance and harmony instead of just focusing on one or just looking at economics and GDP to the exclusion of whether it's balanced, whether it's equitable, whether it's reaching everybody.
Thank you. Our John Main seminar this year is being hosted by our community in Mexico, except it's going to be online, but this year. But the theme is Indigenous wisdom for people today. And that's one question I'd like to ask you. If you feel that those pockets, usually of small countries or networks of small communities that have kept a wisdom tradition, that have not forgotten or been alienated from these values. So let's say indigenous wisdom, those places where you can still find. It's almost like finding, the original forest, primeval forests. So you find where there is still a living spirit of wisdom. One question is, can that be? How do you think it can be communicated to a world that is so totally different in the developed world, that is frenetic and frantic and driven by desire and consumerism and so on, and running around in search of happiness but not finding it? I mean, the ability to communicate between those two states of humanity seems very weak. How can it happen? Can one communicate with the other? Can that wisdom group communicate with the foolish group?
I think it's vital that it happens, actually, Lawrence. I think the possible extinction of indigenous communities, the loss that we're seeing already, is not only devastating to these communities, but it will be a huge loss of our collective wisdom. I see the survival of this indigenous wisdom as really crucial for our survival as a planet, quite frankly, because they've been living sustainably in nature for hundreds and hundreds of years, and that wisdom is still there. I would say that when I've been talking about gross national happiness in different contexts, it started to resonate with a lot of the indigenous wisdom traditions that I've been encountering. So I spoke at a Aboriginal health conference hosted by the Lawicha Institute in Australia last year, and I'll be leading a program on gross national happiness and right livelihood in Canada starting this November, where we will go to Eastern Canada near Halifax to this beautiful piece of kind of original forest in Canada. And we'll be weaving in the story of GNH with the Indigenous, the first world views of Canada. And I think there's a lot of resonance there. The last connection I talk about when I spoke about that definition of happiness from the Prime Minister of Bhutan was our connection to nature. And I think in a lot of the Indigenous worldviews, nature is not seen as separate from us. It's not like we are here and then we're enjoying nature, or nature is a natural resource that we have to protect because we need wood. It's more like we are part of nature. And therefore, unless we're able to connect with that feeling, and it's very much a heart feeling as well as a body feeling, I think we will continue to exploit nature to our utter demise, as we're seeing now with the climate change crisis that we're facing. So I think that sense also of knowing who you are and of community that has been so much a source of Indigenous life, and which has been really threatened by our history of conquest and colonialization, is also really vital. If you remember, community vitality and cultural diversity and resilience are part of the GNH 9 domains. So that ability to feel like we know where we belong, we know where we are when we're on our land, we know our history, we know what our values are. I don't think those are entirely lost in the West either. I think that we need to redefine community. We need to, we're seeing it expanding in many ways here in North America with the recent Black Lives Matter and anti-racist movement that's happening. We're beginning to feel what has been the cost of separating from our communities along racial lines, along economic lines. And we're realizing that it doesn't just hurt the other, it hurts ourselves. I don't know about you, but when I watched that really shocking video of that police kneeling on the neck of George Floyd in the United States, the sense of pain I felt was, of course, for George Floyd, but it was also for, oh my God, that's us. You know, that we as human beings can do that to each other. And in this country and in this moment, it speaks to all of us as how can this be happening? And how could we have let this divide take place in this way in the world? So I think that ability to reconnect to our sense of who is our community. When you say, I'm American, I'm Canadian, I'm Swiss, I'm French, what do you mean when you say that? And can we expand that definition of our collective identity to be more encompassing? And that connects very much to the kind of Indigenous worldview that I think we need to find for ourselves and support the survival of in the communities where they are very much in danger.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's true. That in our very sick and declining developed societies, there are powerful networks of consciousness arising. I mean, I think I've felt here at Bombo that we are connected to that. That's one of the things that's come out of this confinement for me and our community here in Bombo is a sense of what Bombo is for and why it has happened and is happening here, and why people are looking to it and supporting it and coming here and will come here more. And we're waiting for you. In fact, you would have been here in August if it weren't for the shutdown, but we're going to do an online retreat with you from Bombo in August, I know. But
Yes.
so that it's very important, yes, to identify those really resurgent signs of hope in our sick world, and it's as if health is bursting out through the sickness. Maybe there is a deep immune system at work. Maybe there are positive forces of healing and regeneration that we don't invent in a laboratory or in a university, and which are given to us or embedded in us as seeds, waiting for the necessary moments of crisis to be generated. So that's very hopeful what you were saying, and I think that image of the policeman kneeling on the neck of George Floyd was it was two individuals, but it also seemed like a societal relationship too, didn't it? Not even just between two racial groups, but between what humanity was doing to itself, even without blaming one side and as all bad and the other as all victim, but which in that particular case it was, but almost as if this is a self-induced, self-inflicted wound in humanity that is calling forth great powers of healing, which will need great nurturing and great sacrifice perhaps to release. And the second question then relating to that is, how do you in your work talk about this to the politicians and the bankers and the industrialists and the global communicators who hold influence, maybe not as much power as they think they have or they would like to have, but nevertheless are very influential? How do you get their attention?
I feel that I would echo that in spite of how dire this crisis is that we're facing, the multiple crises, there are seeds of hope. And they come from the fact that we can no longer ignore what's around us. I think the real danger before all of this erupted is that we all keep kind of going along with our daily lives and things decline and decline more slowly, but they're still declining to a point where we aren't able to turn things around. So now there's a big wake-up call, and it's what do we do with that? And I'm finding that when I speak to people who are in positions of some influence, whether they be the heads of companies or organizations, people looking at the governance issues within cities, people looking at measurement, economists, that it's now easier to talk about these issues because well-being and happiness has become a personal crisis as well. It's not just something out there. In their own lives, they can relate to what is it about my own lifestyle and my own, my family's lifestyle and the way that we are living together that is either promoting happiness or not. And many of them are suffering as well. So there's an openness to engaging around the issues. There are also members of society and members of planet Earth who are deeply concerned about climate change and the world that they're leaving behind for the next generation. So there's an opportunity now to think about how does a business leader or a politician or someone of influence use that as a way of creating good and positive change in the world. And I think what's powerful about GNH is it's not saying you have to change your profession or do a different kind of business. It's about how are you measuring success when you look at the legacy you're leaving behind. Is it just on the balance books, or is it how you're impacting on society and on the environment? And everybody wants to succeed. Everybody wants to do well. We all like a curve that goes up. But what we're doing is changing the indicators on the axes to say you can keep going up, but what if it was about generating more well-being and happiness, more community, contributing to the environment instead of destroying the environment? Then you can be part of this movement that is trying to heal and bring wholeness. And I think people want that. Coming back to our question earlier about the individual longing for a meaningful life, People want that, but often they don't know how to start. They don't know what the options are. And so it's about presenting a broader menu of options to people to contribute to building the new economy and the new society that we want to see coming out of COVID, coming out of the crisis that we're seeing.
Why, just to backtrack a little, why do you think we get happiness wrong? That when we have all the conditions of happiness, you know, we can reduce infant mortality, we can have clean drinking water, we can, you know, deal with a lot of, cure a lot of diseases, and we have amazing, in the golden age of medicine. That we had these conditions that ought to create happiness. Why is it we get it wrong? Why does the heart and the hand, I think you use that image in some of your teaching, why do the heart and the hand get out of sync? It's almost as if we can't handle the good conditions of happiness.
Yeah, I think I'm surprised by the answer that's coming to me as you ask the question now. But to me, I think it comes from a basic disconnect from our own inner life. So I think, how can I explain this? It feels like a lot of the, maybe what you would call greed or materialist development that we've been following, and a lot of the impulse to not share that, to distribute that more equitably in the world, comes from a basic feeling of fear and not having enough. And that many people believe that happiness is a zero-sum equation, that there's only so much happiness or so much you can fill in the blank, money, so much, whatever it is, to go around. And if I give away some of mine, then there won't be enough for me or my family or my group. When it's not that. It's not a zero-sum game. In fact, when you start to share and you let go of your fear and your possessiveness and your sense of not having enough, no matter, and there's never enough in the kind of culture we're in, once you let go of that, you're creating space for so much more happiness in yourself and in giving to others. And when you create a society that's no longer built on have and have not, them versus us, the rich versus the wealthy, you don't have to live in gated communities. You don't need a huge police force. You don't need hospitals that are giving out painkillers and antidepressants because people are under so much stress of maintaining what is really an unstable and unsustainable societal structure. And letting go of that sense of fear and of there not being enough would start to manifest in the outer world and society the kinds of equitable governance structures, businesses, communities, police forces, hospitals that would bring about a more holistic and balanced society. So I wasn't expecting that answer to come from myself, but I think it comes from a lack of connection with the inner life and that sense of fear and not having enough.
Yeah.
That then drives our actions in the world.
Well, it's a good answer and a wise answer, I think, a truthful one, and it brings us to a key question about meditation, because if we are unable to handle good conditions, you know, materially beneficial good conditions, without becoming self-destructive and self-contradictory, then this disconnect from ourself, from our true nature, it has to be the main object of or focus of our work, to reconnect, to be reintegrated. We began by talking about integration and wholeness. So, what is the place of meditation in your life personally, and how does it inform and sustain the work that clearly you are passionate and clear about, and that makes you happy. So what is the place of meditation in your life?
I think it's become central to the work I'm doing, and in some ways has even superseded the outer work I'm doing in the world. In some ways, I keep a regular morning meditation practice, not just because of the benefits I feel from that, because I've noticed that whatever happens after that morning meditation is completely out of my control. How my day goes, whether at the end I feel I've accomplished the things on my to-do list. There was a point when I was working at the UN where I was in multiple country projects working on HIV and child health around the world. And I had no idea at the end of the day whether I'd really had an impact, because it was at the policy level, or it was around budgets, or around training healthcare workers. And you want to get some feedback, but you don't really know whether that's happening. And there was a phase in my life when I was very much a gender activist and an HIV activist, and I was really getting burnt out by the constant being against, of really trying to right wrongs. And I know what I noticed about the meditation practice is I started to let go of the need to have that feedback loop completed. And I'm realizing now that whether I'm talking about one day's activities or the activities of a lifetime, of a career, many of the outcomes of what I do will never be known by me. I won't know them. And if you're working on climate change, you know what you're doing today may only be felt in the next generations to come. So in the absence of that feedback, I can feel that as long as I've done my meditation in the morning, that day has been accomplished. Anything that happens after that is icing on the cake. And I can kid myself or tell myself that it was a good day and this happened, and of course that project and that meeting went well or didn't go well. But if I know that I've been working on my inner life and I've been connecting to source for myself, and felt my heart opening just a tiny crack more, felt a sense of peace, then that day has been a good day. And it's only 9:30 in the morning.
You've got the rest of the day to get through. The rest of the day, you'll be energized for the rest of the day. Yes. And I will look forward to welcoming you, at least virtually, to Bonvo in August when we have the weekend retreat. And then eventually to Bonvo in a fully incarnational way. And you come and visit when the shutdown is shut down. So thank you, Julia, so much, and we wish you great happiness in the work you're doing to help people understand the meaning of happiness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father Lawrence. It's an honor and a delight on my side, and also looking forward to when we can do this together, virtually and together.